Greetings from Hopalong Hollow. It's July. What do you suppose that is? What do you suppose made that little crater right there? Because I just don't know. I don't know what kind of little critter makes a muddy hole like that. I don't know. Would it be a chipmunk? I don't think so. But this is a shade garden. And we are in a shade garden today because we're going to talk about shade lovers and semi-shade lovers. So this is dappled shade, full shade, and a little bit of sun. In the gardens that we're going to go through today, we will just talk about a couple of these plants. Now this is a garden just off the little lumpy bumpy courtyard where we were in the last video. And this is a very different sort of a spot because in the morning it's completely shady. In the afternoon, all the outskirts, all along the rock here, which is a dry creek, as you can see on the other side, but all along the stonework here, the sun comes out in the afternoon, and this does end up getting, just on the outside, about 6 hours of full sun. So we've got a couple different climates in here, and therefore we can plant several different types of plants. Aside from this beautiful chaste bush, which I absolutely love, it's going to have great big beautiful blue spires of flowers here in just a few weeks. And the beautyberry bush, those were here this year. And the sedum is here, the yarrow is here, and the spirea, it was pink, it's already bloomed. These plants were already here when I started to revive this garden. But everything else was empty. So all the plants in this section were not even here 10 days ago. I just put them in. And that's because last year I had a senior goose who could no longer walk. She was having such a terrible time. And this was her spot. I filled this with straw. I put all her food and water in here and a little swimming pool for her because she just couldn't get around. And this entire bed was dedicated to her for quite a long time until she passed away of old age. So this spot had nothing in it but the straw that I had laid the year before. So that gave me another blank canvas. I've had a lot of blank canvases this year. And the outside here, where I have told you, is full sun in the afternoon. Today's an overcast day, so you can't tell. I just put in the things that I had planted from roots, and I had a lot of them left. So here we have Bellini dahlias here in the front, which is a short pink dahlia, which grows only about 12 to 16 inches tall. And then we have the purple Leatrice, which we planted in the Beatrix Potter Garden. Here we have a Natal dahlia. We have several of those. They are a pom-pom, dark maroon color. We have several dahlias here and several phloxes until we get to the shady side of the garden. Now, shade can be a real problem to find something beautiful to plant, but there are many gorgeous things that you can put in, and a lot of them will be ground covers. So this is a juga. This has beautiful variegated leaves. These are fairly new plants that I just put in, like I said, 10 days ago. Beyond that, you can see liriope, which is a grassy type plant, which produces little tiny purple, almost like looking like lavender spears of color, and sometimes white. And that's definitely a ground cover too, which is good for the background here underneath the tree where there's absolutely no shade. I mean, no sun at all during the day. This garden, I want to show you this plant right here, and a perfect example of how sometimes taking drastic measures is the only thing to do with a plant. Now this is a Shasta daisy, and it's been here about 10 years, and it's always been a great performer until last year when it started to look pretty bad, pretty shaggy. The leaves were always turning rusty. It just wasn't producing like it used to. So I thought, I think it's had its day. I'm just going to cut it down as far as I can. Maybe it'll die, maybe it won't, but I'll take some cuttings off of it. So this is what it looks like after I cut it down like this 10 days ago. This was a huge plant. Cut it down 10 days ago, and look at it. It's got wonderful little leaves sprouting out everywhere. I think it's going to revive beautifully. And at the same time I had done that, I took several cuttings from it, just popped them in some potting soil, and you can see that these cuttings are growing leaves, so we're probably going to get many, many extra plants out of this too. So sometimes you just have to, grit your teeth and cut something way, way down and just see what happens. If a plant is doing really poorly, sometimes pruning it is the best thing to do. It could really give the plant a new lease on life. Now, one thing I just can't seem to help from doing is sprinkling seeds in gardens when they're first starting, because I always think, oh, it looks so sparse, I need more in here. And that is why my gardens, once they get going, they look so jam-packed and so full, and you can't even see the soil once they get going. But that's just the way I like it. You may not want a garden like that, but I like the garden to be totally full. So in this garden, I also sprinkled a lot of seed, mostly dianthus seed and sweet William up in the front, short things all along that dry creek. Usually they'll just be annual seeds that will bloom over the summer just to keep color going in the garden for the entire season, because that's the beauty of annuals. They're the showgirls of the garden. They're a flash in the pan. They just have a brief life, but it's always a colorful one. So I love the annuals because they really are necessary to have a full garden all year long. Of course, these are the new gardens, so they're not full, obviously. They'll look quite different in about a month. But annuals are just great for what they are. They're for color, they're for splash, and they're just for bouquets and bringing in the house. There's just so many of them. But your perennials, that's the mainstay of your garden, and those are the ones that you really want to take care of, and you really need, and you really want to put a lot of perennials in your garden. Asked in the comment section, what are those things you're putting over your plants? And all they are wire basket hangers used upside down. I get them from a farm store out here. I need them to keep the chickens. I mention this all the time. And people might say, well, if the chickens are ruining your garden, why don't you just put them in a pen like normal people do? Well, here's the thing. When I first got chickens, it wasn't because I wanted them. It's because our neighbor brought 30 chickens home from the flea market, and they decided to move in to our place. They liked it better over here, and they stayed. We didn't have any preparation for chickens, and so it started out as free-range chickens, and it has been thus ever since. If I had to choose between my chickens and my gardens, I couldn't choose. I love my chickens, I love my gardens, I love my free-range birds. So I'm willing to put the extra work in the gardens just to keep them safe, and I really don't mind it. I love seeing the chickens meandering around the yard with their silly little antics. And so it's just something, a little bit of extra work that I have to put up with because I love my animals. So after I lay the basket, the wire basket, above the plant, I secure it with one of these landscaping staples. And I will usually put one on both sides so it's immovable, even with a strong chicken foot. A bit of a sprinkle now, but that's okay because we're under the pergola, so we're going to stay nice and dry. Maybe that very thick wisteria over my head really keeps it fairly dry in here. We'll get a couple little sprinkles, but that won't matter. So anyway, I have to be in here to show you another beautiful shade plant, and this would be the heucheras. This plant can take shade, dappled shade, and even a little bit of sun. But I found that in our hot and humid climate, it really does best in the shade. And the beautiful thing about the heucheras, also known as coral bells, are the stunning, stunning leaves. So you can see the chartreuse with the yellow and the lime green and all those beautiful patterns with beiges and pinks in those leaves. The leaves are as beautiful as any flower. You can see that the coral bells, the little flowers, they're pretty, but they're just not that impressive, unless you like spires, which I do. I like spires of flowers. And different colors and shades, purples, all these beautiful variegated purples and pinks. And over here we've got almost a deep green and maroon with the coral bells. And they like moist, rich soil, but well drained. And this is just a perfect spot for these. And sprinkled in amongst these heucheras are little forget-me-nots, yes. Those were that was seed that I sprinkled in here. And beyond that is another shade garden right over here. On the other side of the pergola are very young hydrangea plants. I just put these in last year, so they're just pretty short. And there are some phloxes which are just starting to come up, some bigger phloxes. Phloxes tend to like a sunny location more so than shade. One thing you want to think about when you're planting a garden or as your garden's evolved are creating vistas in your garden. So as you're sitting in a particular garden or you're walking through a path and you look just a little bit beyond, you could see another garden, and then you can see another garden, and then you can see something else that would cause you to be interested to walk a particular way. So here beyond this little woven fence, we have the shade garden that we just talked about. There's a little path in front of it that leads up a slope. Up on the hill we have where the daylilies had just finished blooming. They're all gone now. And that's a wildflower garden. And then we've got that shade garden, and beyond that we've got the courtyard. And once you've got your little garden bed or your big garden bed, it's important to think about what is outside the garden bed, what is directly outside that bed. And that's where you come to the frame of your garden. So that could be a really green lawn, which could be framing your garden, or pathways. And you could take the simplest of things, such as old brick or stone, and create another bit of beauty and interest along the outside of your garden. so that when someone's walking along the path, or you're walking along the path, you even have something interesting to see on your path. You can see that there's a flagstone path, which has been a little bit neglected over the last year. So all I'm going to do to fill in this path and make it more interesting is take some slate, broken slate that I dig up in a gully up there on the slope. It's just something that's already here on the property. I don't have to pay for it. And it fills in those spaces and makes this a much more interesting walkway. You may not have some natural stones lying around that you can just gather, but pea gravel, which can be rather expensive if you need a lot of it, but it sure looks wonderful on a path. I'll go buy some salvaged bricks from a salvage yard or off of Craigslist, or just walk around some land looking for these flat stones. And it takes a little bit of effort, but it's worth it. Nobody ever said keeping a garden and a home was easy. It takes work and effort and a lot of commitment. Of how one job simply leads to another in gardening often, because I was gathering the stone and the sand to fill in those little areas in the pathways, I decided to go ahead and relay this brickwork underneath the pergola, which is also part of these shade gardens and part of the Colonial Herb Garden. And every couple years I do have to come in here and relay this, because the weather, the rain, the flooding from the dry creek often runs onto this pergola courtyard, and the ground sinks and dips, and before you know it I can't put any of the chairs and the table on here because it's so uneven. So this is all brickwork, and I actually like doing brickwork. I get a strange satisfaction out of laying brick and stone. I just love doing it. You're a bit crooked. Okay, having relayed this particular little courtyard underneath the pergola, it's still a nice lumpy bumpy one. It's just a little more even than it was before, so that my furniture is stabilized on the bricks. But this puts me in mind of something else, and something that you really want to keep in mind as you are planning your gardens, and that is your garden bones. And what are garden bones? Garden bones are the permanent structures in and around your garden and your landscape and your yard, such as sidewalks, fences, paths, walkways, statuary, trees, bushes, hedges, things that are pretty much permanent. They're things that you build around. You're building your garden around these structures, and they're just so important in your garden and in your landscaping and in your style that I just can't emphasize it enough. And one thing that I think is so important is what I said about planning your garden, and that's repetition. So as you're planting your garden, you're repeating the plants. You are not having 12 different plants. You want, say, 3 or 4 of the same plant, and you're going to repeat that throughout your garden. And like I said in the last video and the one before it, it gives your garden cohesion. So instead of planting, say, 1 hydrangea and 1 coneflower and 1 primrose, I'm going to plant 6 hydrangeas, but I'm going to stagger 3 here and maybe 2 here and then another in another spot, but all in the same garden bed. and I'm going to stagger the plants, and I'm going to just repeat the same plants over and over again. That could be only 3 plants in your garden, that could be 10 plants in your garden, but it's so important to repeat those plants. But it's also important to repeat your garden bones, and I have an entire video about that. But you want to stick with the same theme. Obviously, I am sticking with an era, an Edwardian era, Victorian era, that sort of thing. And also I'm going to be using, and I do all over the place, the woven fencing, the twig fences, a lot of stonework, a lot of old wood such as timbers or cedar. And everything has sort of an aged look to it. It's the way we want it, which is why I like the broken concrete, and I like the lumpy, bumpy courtyard, and I like the gravel walkways. So here I often repeat the wattle fence, for example. Just the small, short, woven garden fences are seen throughout the property. On each side of the house, the brick surrounds the property in pathways, stone walls, stone hedges, rustic structures, and I'm just trying to stay in keeping of the vintage look that is here on this property, because this house is over a century old, and I want to stay in that time period. So being of that vintage look of the Edwardian and Victorian times, which is also the era of the books that I write and illustrate, the artwork that I do, it's all very homey and nostalgic and just old-fashioned, if you want the real word for it. It's just an old-fashioned look. Leads me to garden ornaments. And the only thing that I can recommend, especially recommend, is not to overdo it. I mean, if you overdo garden ornaments, it's not going to be charming, it's not going to be pretty, it's going to look tacky. So try to control yourself and keep things a little bit more subdued than you may like. I mean, it's easy to get really enthusiastic and get a whole lot of stuff. But you want to be artistic about it, and you want to be very particular about what you get. This old, wonderful old statue, she lost her head a long time ago, so I moved her into the shade garden because her head is sort of leaning on the branches of the chaste bush. And I think she's very beautiful and secretive back here. You really have to basically look for her. But I don't have a lot of ornamentation in the garden aside from her and this funny old urn that is very, very like her. So if you are using statuary, for example, in your garden, keep it in the same era as everything else in your garden. So I use a lot of wild animals, a lot of rabbits, maybe some squirrels here and there, and I have a couple frogs, just little things. And other than that, basically I'm just using maidens, and I only have 3 of those. I think we have 1 angel somewhere. Yeah, I think she fell over, though. We've got to go save her. Her face is in the mud. But just by toning it down a little bit and keeping with the same theme and not overdoing it, it will add a lot of beauty to your garden, a lot of interest, and sometimes a little bit of a surprise. So over here on the other side of the pergola, and that little courtyard, is the herb garden, the traditional herb garden that I put in a few years back. I guess it was about 2 years ago. And I'm glad to be able to show it to you at this point where the plants are not really taken over yet, because you can see the layout of the garden this way. So this wonderful little garden is only about 12 foot by 12 foot, but contains over 22 different herbs. So in this garden are culinary, ornamental, and medicinal herbs. And I think I threw in a couple plants just for beauty, such as this lovely little obedience plant right here, which is blooming in white. Other than that, we have sages, joe pye and yarrow, and many, many other herbs. I want to go into this garden again in a couple weeks when everything is really going strong and explain each herb to you and its purpose. But I want to wait until this is really looking beautiful. I did want you to see it, however, in this position, because you can really see the brickwork and the layout of the garden. It's put into different sections so that everything can try to stay within its boundaries, although sometimes that doesn't happen. But so far, they're behaving themselves pretty well. Here's another example of, as you are looking and standing in one spot, you're not seeing just one garden. Beyond that garden that makes you want to explore further. So from this herb garden, I can see a garden on a slope, a set of steps. I might want to go up those steps. Beyond that pergola. Oops. So also beyond this herb garden, you've got another little twig fence, a pergola, and beyond that it seems to be another garden. And then another garden on a slope. And then beyond that, there's a grassy slope. So what's beyond that slope? You don't know until you take a walk up that slope to find there's a pond on the other side. So each thing leads to another. And you want your visitors, your family, and yourself to always be interested in the pathways and what lies beyond the path. So pathways and vistas just make you want to explore the garden even further and see what's beyond. So it's good to have a little surprise around every corner. Hiding in a pot, or down by your feet, something ever so small, like a little patch of thyme. We'll just mosey around the garden a little bit and take a look at a few things that are happening with some of the gardens that we planted in the last couple videos. But I want to show you this teasel plant. I planted this from seed last year. Nothing much happened, but this year it really took off. There's a lot of information and a lot of fascination about this plant, and I want to go into that in the next video when I talk about the herbs in the herb garden, and I'll tell you all about teasel, how it got its name, and what you can do with it. Isn't that a marvelous head on a plant? It's just so interesting, and it's not finished being interesting because it's going to turn purple, and it's going to start blooming, not from the bottom, not from the top, but from the center of that spiky little bulb there. It's going to start turning purple and getting little buds from the center and then heading out in both directions until it's a big purple blob. Spiky blob, I should say. And let's just take a look at what's happening in the Maidens Garden this week. Things are moving along beautifully. Look at all those zinnias planted from seed in the last video. Just coming up all over the place. And then here in the front, those little dwarf cosmos are spreading. The yarrow's growing, the dahlias are growing, rudbeckia's looking good, and I can see some sunflowers there in the back. And all you have to do in that garden or in any new garden that you have is go out there every day, in the cool of the day hopefully, and start pulling those weeds while they're small. You can see here a number of weeds that are already trying to take over in this garden. Familiarize yourself with what is a weed and what is a plant. Obviously, this is a zinnia. I don't want to pull that. This is a penstemon, but over here in the corner, I can see 2 weeds, and they're pretty good size already. Peeking these zinnias, I can see a few little weeds that need to be taken care of. But it's almost therapeutic getting in there and clearing out your garden. It's kind of like vacuuming bits and pieces off the kitchen floor. It just looks so much better when you're done. And the only things that are there are the things that should be. There, I got a handful of weeds. It didn't even take me 10 minutes. And I've got a nice clear space here. Everything else are seedlings that I planted. Well, I do believe it's time for some of that Independence Day shortcake. What do you think? Well, I think this is the prettiest strawberry shortcake that I ever have made. Beautiful, easy to make, and red, white, and blue. For my fellow Americans, happy Independence Day. We are celebrating with the red, white, and blue today in our flowers and in our food. I wish I could tell you those strawberries were out of my garden, but ours were gone, about 2 weeks ago. We stopped getting strawberries, and the blueberries, unfortunately, were from the farmer's market. But everything in the vase is from the garden, red, white, and blue, as much as I could. For our reds, we've got sweet peas, and as close as red as I could get with the Monarda, the bergamot, the bee balm, otherwise known as. For our blues, we are using Speedwell, Veronica Speedwell, and some little purple sweet peas. And around the back, we've got the blue balloon flowers, which they don't do very well in a vase. They're pretty much drooping right now. We've got white roses, Queen Anne's lace, gooseneck loosestrife, and this could pose as either red or blue, drumstick allium. And we've also got some white yarrow. So we're enjoying the shortcake right here under the pergola in the midst of all the shade gardens. And it's so pretty, I don't know that I want to cut that thing open. I just think I want to stare at it for a while and drink the lemonade. Let me start out by showing you where my recipe came from for my shortcake. The Betty Crocker Picture Cookbook from 1952, I believe, 1952. Anyway, this was my mother's cookbook, and then it became my cookbook, and as you can see, it has had a lot of wear. Pages have definitely been gone through, and I mean they have cooking stains and food on them, because I learned how to cook and bake out of this book. I think the first thing I ever made out of here was a coffee cake and cinnamon rolls, and then I learned how to make gingerbread out of this cookbook. But I just love the graphics, I love the pictures. We used to go over these photographs for hours just looking at the food page. I'm preparing a 4th of July or Independence Day dessert. I wanted something so all-American, and who could be more all-American than Betty Crocker? Even if she never really existed, we really don't know. Was there really a Betty Crocker? I don't know, you tell me, but in my mind there definitely was. Also, shortcake, strawberry shortcake of this style is very loved by Americans all over, as well as lemonade. The shortcake itself is so easy to make. It's more of a biscuit, and it's not a soft and spongy cake. It is more of a firm and dense and a little bit crunchy batter there, like a great big biscuit. So we love this kind of old-fashioned meal and probably only eat it once a year. This also gave me an excuse to use my gigantic Bordalo Pinheiro strawberry terrine over there, which is actually great for any kind of punch or drink or tea, cold tea, iced tea, soups, and stews. The cake platter actually goes with the terrine, but it makes a great food platter as well. And then, of course, we've got these Bordalo Pinheiro textured plates, dishes, bowls that you've seen many times before. This being Independence Day, I think it would do all of us a good deal of good if we would reacquaint ourselves with the Declaration of Independence. I ran off a copy off the internet. Unfortunately, I couldn't get it to print any bigger than this, so I think we'll save that for next year, where I will read part of the Declaration of Independence. But I do have these wonderful old history books, and these are very, very old. Library of American History, and it has a wonderful chapter here on Old Glory, the Stars and Stripes, our American flag. This is a 20-volume set of these beautiful old books with marbled pages. Just look at that. And they've got a lot of wonderful etchings. I think this was printed around 1900. It's not terribly old, but, well, it's over 100 years old. But here's Paul Revere's Ride, and a lot of wonderful illustrations. These books are in just wonderful, wonderful condition, and an image on nearly every single page. But I do want to read this. It's pretty brief. Old Glory, the Stars and Stripes, was born on the 14th of June, 1777, on which day Congress patriotically resolved that the flag of the United States be 13 stripes, alternate red and white, the Union be 13 stars, white and in a blue field, presenting a new constellation. It has never been known to what influence we were indebted for the selection of the stars and stripes in our flag. Some have thought that the stripes were of Dutch origin, for they occur in Dutch armorial bearings, while others suspect that they were introduced as a compliment to Washington, on whose coat of arms both the stars and stripes appear. But there's no tangible evidence that either supposition is correct. His country, nevertheless, had much to do with designing the first Stars and Stripes. It was he, assisted by a committee appointed by Congress, who directed the preparation of the first design. They called upon Mrs. Elizabeth Ross in Philadelphia sometime between May 23rd and June 7th, 1777, with the request that she should prepare the flag. Her house, 239 Arch Street, was still standing as a sacred shrine at the opening of the 20th century. Washington had a rough draft in which the stars were 6-pointed. Mrs. Ross showed that 5-pointed stars would look better, and her suggestion was adopted. She had finished the flag by the next day, and it was received with great admiration wherever displayed. She was the manufacturer of flags for the government for many years, and her children afterwards succeeding to the business. A few brief words on our American flag. I'm sure we could go into a lot more detail, and we will, maybe the next 4th of July, we will do that. In the meantime, thank you all for your very nice comments about my garden book that I'm working on. I have more interesting news in the next video to tell you about as far as the art is concerned and the selling of my fiber critters. I'm going to start doing online virtual shows and fewer in-person shows, but we're going to start doing once a month a show right here in Hopalong Hollow from online. And I'll tell you more about that next time. But in the meantime, I am really anxious to have a piece of that shortcake. I guess, oh, that looks so good. So, I guess I will have to cut into it after all. And I'll see you next time in Hopalong Hollow. Bye.